Okay, hello, good evening, everybody. I think we are going live. If anything goes wrong, you know that you can write me on the chat and also on the YouTube and the Facebook page. So thank you very much for being here. Welcome to this first live talk of the second season of the Neuro-COGNiMATH Group Seminar. It's an honor for me to have Dr. Greta Fastrich today with us. So first of all, I want to express my deep gratitude to my students who have followed and trusted me through these years. Without you, this could not be possible. And I am very proud of you. And that is my truth. Neuro-COGNiMATH is a family, and we must always protect our family and provide everything necessary for them to move forward and fulfill their goals and dreams. And we have learned these months that technology can unite us, not only with each other, but also with people from other countries, different cultures, time zones, languages, such as this great opportunity that we have today with Dr. Greta. We must use this technology and the different virtual platforms to include, to join and twin, to collaborate and share, to connect, to educate, to humanize, to be happy with what we do, and to love more what we do, not to the contrary or for something negative. At Neuro-COGNiMATH, we believe in these values, and wherever we are today or in the future, we will always strive to continue working hard for you. So happy anniversary to all the Neuro-COGNiMATH family. So thank you very much for this opportunity to be here again. And for me, it's a great pleasure to present our guest today, Dr. Greta Fastrich. So let me just introduce her with a little bit about her career. So Dr. Greta obtained her diploma in psychology that is equivalent to a master's degree in the University of Marburg, with the topic of cognitive neuroscience and clinical psychology with fMRI study examining the effects of emotion of response inhibition. She obtained her PhD at the University of Reading with the relationship between intrinsic motivation and knowledge. She also, as a student assistant, is collaborating in projects related with EEG activation relation with positive emotions, also with fMRI experiments, also as a research assistant in the Maruyama's laboratory at the University of Reading. She made a postdoc at the University of Reading in a project involving fMRI in neural correlates of decision-making between different task difficulties with the help of computational models. And now she is doing a postdoc at the University of Western Australia in the Simon Farrell's lab, focusing on multiple goals pursued under different types of environmental and social uncertainty. She has a lot of computer skills, awards, workshops, presented posters, conference talks, and research papers. So for me, it's a great pleasure to present and to give to you to Greta. So good morning, Greta, there in Australia. Thank you very much for this opportunity. The scenario is all yours.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for the invitation, Alfonso. I think what you've done with your group is amazing, and that you still look after them in these uncertain times is wonderful. Always great to have your mind filled with new things and another opportunity to learn. So yeah, let me dive right in and bring up my slides. First hurdle, making the computer work. This looks great, wonderful. So what I will be focusing on today is basically work I did during my PhD. And this is a topic I'm very passionate about, so it's a great opportunity for me to be able to talk to you about it. So today it's all about intrinsic motivation, and I will give you an overview of the talk. So I've got two steps I want to talk to you about. First off, I want to give you like a general kind of overview about intrinsic motivation. This will mostly be built on research derived from cognitive psychology. And then I want to give you a more detailed research example using one of my studies. And we're going to look at how interest can develop over time and how we can utilize growth curve modeling to kind of understand this better. So let's step right in and let's actually look at what is intrinsic motivation. So if we can see kind of what motivates us in everyday life, there are a lot of different things that can make us inspired to do something. So for example, some people might be driven by awards or by reaching like sports goals. You all are probably be driven to get your degree, and you might want to do so to later get a good job. There are other motivators, like something like social praise. And here we can kind of see that a lot of these actions in these areas, you kind of do a lot of the training you do for your sports, a lot of the learning you do for to get your degree. You do it for a certain purpose. And this is all, you do your tasks to achieve certain goals and gain rewards. It's important to note that different people might have different reasons for performing tasks and actions. And sometimes you do a certain task for multiple reasons and not just for one certain goal. But there are also other kinds of activities. For example, playing a Game Boy. You don't really have many kind of, you're probably not going to get, if you do it as a child, you're probably not going to get praised by your parents. But there's something just fun about these activities, like going to the cinema, reading like an interesting book. And sometimes it seems that activities in and of themselves seem to be rewarding. And that's what we kind of call intrinsic motivation. It's when the task itself seems to be what you find interesting. And again, it's important to know that you don't always have one clear-cut motivation for something. So sometimes activities can be both extrinsic and intrinsically motivated. And even there, it's not quite clear-cut, but there are certain characteristics which seem to kind of group intrinsic motivation together. And I will talk about these a little further. And the first we can kind of see is that something that makes a task interesting for us is gaining information. And information itself seems to be rewarding. So one thing that was found in studies is that both monkeys and humans seem to sacrifice potential extrinsic rewards for information, even if this information doesn't really help them. So an example of this is the study with monkeys done by Blanchard and colleagues. And what they did is they had monkeys and they were deprived of water. And they gave them two options, so two choices, and they could get different amount of water in these choices. However, at the end of the trial, they would not always get water. And one of these choices was attached to kind of ahead information about whether they would get water or not. And what could be seen is that sometimes monkeys would sacrifice potential amount of water just to get these ahead information about whether in the end they would get water or not. That's kind of interesting to see because this information has no other use than kind of inform them during their waiting time. There's no preparations they can do, nothing. But yet these information seems to be interesting. And what other people have found that the way we crave information seems to be dependent on the total what people can get, but also the more uncertainty there seems to be there, the more people kind of seem to want information. And we can kind of connect this to real life as well. Like if you think about children and babies, then if you just look at them and how they spend their days. Most babies have everything they could want for. They have every kind of, they get food, they have shelter, they have their parents to look after. And yet they constantly seem to be doing something. They seem to look at things, they seem to interact with them. So there we have a very kind of clear example that there seems to be something going on. They seem to be motivated by more than just getting food, getting shelter. Yeah, and I've already mentioned that uncertainty seems to be a driver, which kind of makes us want information. And this seems to be not only the case when something positive is at stake, but this also seems to be the case when people actually can get negative outcomes. And this is a great, very simple study by C and Juan. And what they found is that they kind of set this up in a study where people were told, like, oh, you can wait in the room and we will call you to the experiment later. So it wasn't phrased as an experiment. And they were just told, oh, there are a couple of boxes here with pens from a previous experiment. And if you, we still need to put them away. We just haven't come around to them. But please, if you want, you can interact with them. Like there's one box over there, which where the pens, if you click them, they will always give you a chalk, that kind of joke pens. And there's one box over there, which will never do that. And then there's the last box, which might give you a shock or might not. And then what they did, they just left the participants alone. And later on, they just kind of looked at the participants' behavior and how often they clicked each pen. And what you can see is that just generally, even if they kind of don't have any effect to expect, people still clicked. People even clicked if they were expected to be given a shock, which is just generally not a nice thing. But people seem to be even more inclined to click a pen if they didn't know the outcome. So there's something about uncertainty which drives people to kind of explore it and show a behavior which might reduce uncertainty. Yeah, but it doesn't seem to be all about just getting knowledge about the outside world and about contingencies there. There seems to be something about just you kind of exploring your own skills. And yeah, we did an experiment about that, trying to explore this. And what we did is we gave people the remote association task. And in the remote association task, what you do is you give people 3 words. For example, it's office, mail, hat. And you ask them to find another word, which can then, if they connect it to each individual word, always form a compound word. So in this case, it would be box, because you have box office, you have mailbox, and you have hat box. And we gave this task to participants. And then we let them solve it. And if they weren't able to solve it, we gave them 3 different options. And what we gave them as an option is, in the think more condition, if they pick this, they would get to try and solve the task once again. Then they did a rating about the task, and then they would get the actual answer of the task. But they could also have the option to just get the answer immediately, do an unrelated task. We did another rating, which was a mental demand rating. We just did this to see if maybe they just picked other conditions than the think more conditions because they found them easier. Turns out the opposite is the case. So the think more condition is more effortful, which is good for us. And we also gave them a 3rd option, which is just they never get to see the answer of this task, and they just do 3 unrelated ratings. And what we found, especially here in study 4, which follows this particular design, is that while people tend to prefer the answer, so they want to kind of reduce their uncertainty. They want to know what it's all about. There is definitely amount of people which prefers the think more condition. So they want to try again, even though they can get the answer immediately. And this think more condition is even strengthened if we give them, if we control for the time spent till the answer. So if we put the answer in the end in the rate and answer condition, then they are even more inclined to go for the think more condition. So it doesn't seem to be all about just information about the outside world. There might be something about feeling good about being able to solve a task, or kind of assessing your own skill. Can I make this? Can I get to this? So why do we do this? So at first, this might even seem counterproductive to some. Like, why would you spend so much energy into doing things like playing Tetris? Or why there must be a reason why we have developed the skills, and why not only humans develop the skills, but also animals. And this goes back like very far in the evolutionary kind of chain. And I think a really good example to kind of show this is if we think about kind of algorithms, for example. So AIs who are really, really good at solving a task. So they've been shown like, solve this particular task, and they are better than humans at these things. But that doesn't mean that even though the algorithm is obviously very successful at something, if you would put them into an actual environment or just give them a different task, they're going to be terrible at it. They are not prepared to transfer their knowledge to something else, and they're not prepared to just adapt to a different environment. And yeah, that's kind of a very important thing. So let's dive into a study and look at a robot which could actually do this. And these are this is a project done by the Flowers Laboratory in France, and they do some amazing work, and they kind of explore what happens if you instill curiosity in robots. And what they do is they've got a robot here, and they kind of, all they did is kind of get this robot to maximize its learning. And they gave them certain things which they could manipulate the environment. So they could use the joystick. Only one of them worked to kind of manipulate this arm over here. And with this arm over here, they could start to kind of look at the ball and move it around. And that is exactly that this robot managed to do. So it quickly learned, no, this only one of the joysticks learned, so it spent most of its time on it. And then started to be able to just, even without any other, it never had the goal, move the ball around, it started moving the ball around. And it even did manage things that the experimenters never expected it to do. And if you think about something like this in an actual environment, often we kind of, if you think back about where we evolved as a species, often we were at points where at some point we suddenly needed skills. For example, if a prey animal runs into a predator, then they shouldn't just be able to just learn at that moment, like, oh, maybe how do I run quickly away from it? It's good if they've already had these skills. If you think about children, children don't just start learning about how to interact with their environment, how to survive the moment they start becoming independent from their parents. They've already started to build up to this point until that very time point, so that by the time they start to make a move away from their parents, they've already have a massive amount of skill set. And intrinsic motivation is one of our great helpers to develop these skill set before we actually fully need them. And there is a certain way, so there are different ways in which intrinsic motivation can help us. And one is the so-called Goldilocks effect, that intrinsic motivation kind of makes you look at and seek out tasks which are just right for you. And what we can see here is that what, for example, flow theory kind of tells you is that if you pick medium difficult tasks, they are the most motivating. So if a task is very easy, you get bored. If a task is very difficult, you get frustrated, and you might experience that in your everyday life while you learn. But if you are in the sweet spot where you have medium difficulty, then you just get to the point where you feel like all your effort becomes effortless, and you can just work, and it just doesn't feel like you put in much effort. And you can see that in multiple experiments as well. So for example, babies seem to attend sequences of medium difficulty. If you ask people to choose between different kind of games, they tend to pick medium difficult games. And then slowly, as their skills increases, the difficulties they pick increase as well. If you give people the choice of picking between different opponents in games, then they seem to prefer other people who have their kind of skill level. And this is the study we're going to look at later. If you kind of look at how intrinsic motivation grows over time, then you can see that at the beginning, it starts out a little flat, but it kind of starts growing while you grow your knowledge, and eventually it seems to dip again. And the reason we might do this is because if you pick medium difficult items, you maximize learning. So you learn the most if you kind of just at a sweet spot. So it can help you learn, intrinsic motivation can help you learn by guiding you towards the things which has the maximum impact on your learning. But there's one other way in which intrinsic motivation can help you, and that is it doesn't only help you select things you learn about well, but it also helps you learn about the things you find intrinsically motivating. And just to kind of walk you through one example, we did a study in which we gave people trivia questions. For example, what is the most shoplifted book? After we gave them trivia questions, we asked them to make a guess. Then we asked them to rate their confidence in that guess. Then we asked them to please say how curious you are for the answer. We gave them the answer, and then we asked them, how interesting did you find the answer? And what we can find in this study is that if you kind of look at how curious people you are, oh, very important point, I forgot. After that, 2 weeks later, we invited them back in and we gave them all the questions again, and assessed whether they now knew the answer or not. So we have kind of a memory effect as well. So if we look at just for the items they got wrong the first time, if we look at kind of how all our measures, confidence, curiosity for the answer, interest in the answer after they presented relates, we can see that our original curiosity rating and interest ratings seem to be highly related. But, and that's the important part, is the more interesting you found the answer, the more likely you are later to remember it. Yeah, so to summarize, what we found so far is that people seem to be curious about new information and seek out information, even if it might have negative consequences. So, for example, if people might sacrifice rewards for it, or people might even explore potential negative consequences like shocks. And in addition, this seems to be like intrinsic motivation seems to help us learn by two different mechanisms. And that is in the way how it makes us select certain stimuli. And here we seem to go for medium difficult stimuli. But on the other hand, it also enhances learning of what we find, of stimuli we find intrinsically motivating. And you can see that in the brain as well. So intrinsic motivation seems to be connected to the reward network. But you can also see that when people are curious, people are interested, the hippocampus seems to be activated as well. And the hippocampus, as probably some of you know, is kind of the memory formation part of the brain. So overall, what researchers think is that being intrinsically motivated, being curious, being interested seems to be kind of a core mechanism of human behavior, and it especially enables us to develop skills, but also gain knowledge and information before we potentially need it. So let's take a closer look at one of the studies. So I can give you an example of how we might study intrinsic motivation and how we might utilize things like growth curve modeling, in this case, hierarchical growth curve modeling, to study this, and how this particular statistic works. So the background here is, if you look at interest, and when I talk about interest, it's kind of the how kind of drawn you are to a certain topic. So if you're highly interested in something, you are likely to seek it out on your own, and you're likely to engage with it. And this seems to be kind of, there seems to be kind of a formation of knowledge, which you can get attached to. And knowledge in itself seems to be very crucial to kind of develop a deeper rooted interest in something. So if you don't know much about a topic, you might go, if you hear about it the first time, you might go, oh yeah, that sounds interesting. But you are less likely to then later on, if there's no one else telling you about it, or nothing you kind of come across about this topic, you're less likely to go like, oh yeah, wait, there was this thing and I really want to know more about it. So knowledge seems to be very important. And what other people have found is that this kind of holding interest for a longer time when you first come across a topic you might be interested in, seems to be important to develop a more deeper rooted interest. So one where you just sit, you think about what you could do, and you might go, I always wanted to look this up and know more about it, or I want to read this book about this particular topic, and go online on your own without having a friend talk to you about it, without you coming across it from somewhere else. And knowledge might be an important and helping factor in this. So when we kind of look at interest and how it develops in situations where you come across it from somewhere else, and in the literature, there's of course situational interest. So interest which arises in you because someone else tells you about it, or because you're reading a book about it. And as you can imagine, this is a very important topic for educational psychology, and plays a role in classrooms. So a lot of the studies which have been done so far come from kind of classroom settings. And we can see studies being done which kind of use multiple time points to look at how situation differs between them and how situation might develop. However, classrooms are very different in how they develop. There are different tasks being done at different times. So this kind of, if you look at the different studies which have been done so far, you can see that in some studies, interest kind of grows over time, and sometimes the interest decreases, and sometimes it stays the same. And it's really hard to draw conclusions if you're just kind of interested in how it would naturally develop if you didn't have all of these different factors of Some people have a teamwork task at the front. Some people have like, other people make like a problem solving task in between. And there are just differences in how a particular lesson goes. And we kind of wanted to have like a baseline. Just if you gradually give them knowledge about a topic, how does interest change? Because if you think about it, this is also very important to actually interpret other people's more complicated studies. And if you see a classroom study, there will always be knowledge they gradually learn over time. So just having like a baseline kind of idea of how interest develops when you give them gradual knowledge can help you interpret other more organic studies findings. So what we did is we kind of looked up interesting bits and pieces about different countries, and we gave participants in an online experiment just gradually pieces of information about different countries. Overall, they did the task for 30 minutes. So depending on how many countries they got through, that's the kind of data points we have for them. And this is what the interface looked like. So we had one country, and then they could get up to 10 pieces of information about this country. And these were presented in random order to kind of control for effects of some pieces of information being more interesting than other. These were all lesser known countries, so we kind of wanted to control for previous knowledge and expectations about these countries. And we gave them questions in the front that if they were already too familiar, they would just skip this particular country. And after, so they then got to read a piece of information about a different category. And after they got it, they clicked next. And then we asked them 2 questions. First of, how interesting do you find this country? And how much do you like this country? And we are going to focus on interests here. So what we are really interested in is how interest develops over time. And there's a particular technique you can utilize to kind of study this, and that is called growth curve modeling. And really, it's just a form of regression. But instead of having your predictor variable like age, or I don't know, a certain condition or something like that, what you use is you use the time points in which each of your dependent variables was conducted. So in this case, our dependent variable is interest, and our predictor variable is the time point in kind of the range of category information of that particular country in which this was assessed. And you can not only use kind of linear growth. So if we just have the single time points, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, what we could get is kind of linear growth. We can get if interest seems to stay the same, if interest goes up, if interest goes down. But that might not always be the case, and there might be more complicated relationships between time and interest here. And that's why we included a second order effect. So we included quadratic term here, and you can go up as far as you want. So whatever makes sense for your studies, you can use this. For us, we were only interested in change, and we will later on see what that looked like in our experiment. So yeah, we included a second order term, and because this is just a regression, you can kind of combine it with other techniques like hierarchical modeling. And that's exactly what we did. So overall, our model kind of looks like this. So if we look at like the first level here, we have our different categories. As you can see, they were presented in different orders. And this is our independent variable, our predictor variable time. And we have both linear information, so just the simple time, and quadratic information, so just that's the squared time in there. But as kind of growth of interest might differ between countries and might differ between participants, we also included second level. So we kind of nested our data within countries, and we nested our data within participants. This also allows us to include like second order effects, like the original familiarity they reported. So we asked them just before that how familiar they were with the country, and we kind of included that as a controlling variable. And one of the reasons why this kind of structure is very helpful is, if you remember from our design, we just let people do, we just let people get to a certain time point. So people will contribute a different amount of data to our experiment. And there might be differences between participants, and we don't want one participant who, for example, read very quickly and got through the experiment very quickly to have a much bigger impact on our data analysis than people who were kind of slow and just contributed, for example, the data of six countries. So kind of nesting this can help control for that, because the effect is first established on a participant level, and then you kind of draw conclusions to the larger population of all your participants. So just to give you don't need to understand this, but I just wanted to give you an example of how this looks like in a model. Down here is the whole model, and this is kind of split into our 3 different levels I just introduced you. So on the first level, you kind of see just a normal regression equation with time points as a predictor, and then quadratic time points as a predictor. And every fixed effect on this time point is then kind of split in the higher levels. And what goes for the second level is then kind of teased apart on the participant level as well. And then you have variances as well on the higher levels and on the first level. Don't worry if you don't understand this. It's not really important to follow the results at this moment, but I just wanted to give you an idea of how this looks. And this is also how it looks then as a result. So you kind of, for each of your effects, you can get a result. And because people are way better to interpret a result in a graph, we then put this in a graph. So this is much more easier to understand. And what we can see here is, when we transfer this into a graph, that interest seems to kind of start at first, but eventually seems to decrease. So here you can see like the second effect order coming in. If we had only a first effect, then we couldn't see this change over time, but there seems to be change over time. So we have start of growth and then eventually kind of dips. We did the same thing again in a second study. And here we were also interested on how choice might affect people's first of interest, but also when people actually decide to disengage from a topic. And we basically had the same design again. However, after they read a category, after they read some information and they did their interest ratings, we gave them the choice, and we had 2 different conditions. So in the first conditions, we only gave them the choice: do you want to stay with this country, or do you want to move on to the next country? And in the full choice condition, what we asked people is not only if they want to move on, but they were also able to pick a category. To kind of give them a start with these different, with a different country, we gave them a couple of randomization trials. So they got a couple of random information in front, which followed the exact procedure as the previous experiment. And then after they've done through this, they were given a choice. And overall, 75 participants took part in an online experiment. This is the model now. So now you can see that because people were able to disengage, we have less information for some countries. We might have almost all information for another country. And these, of course, are again nested within participants. And on participant level, we can now kind of look at the effects on which conditions people were in. So we put that in as a predictor. But also on the level of the countries, we put in the predictor of how much information there is in total, because we wanted to see differences in the amount, how interest developed within countries people didn't stay with very long, and how interest developed in countries where people actually sampled a lot of information from. We want to see if there are any differences between them. And if we look at that, then they are. So if we just look at the kind of results where people could only decide whether they wanted to move on or not, we can see that if people didn't want to move on, there doesn't seem to be an initial increase in interest. But if people sampled a lot of information, there seems to be quite an increase in interest over time. And only at the end, it starts to kind of dip down a little. If we also gave people the option to kind of look at and pick their categories, what we can see is that people, this growth seems to kind of be even further. So people's interest seems to grow more strongly, but the change then, so the kind of quadratic term and the eventual decrease seems to be stronger as well. And one of the reasons we can think this might happen is because people pick their favorite countries at categories at first. Like, for example, trivia was a very popular one. So people might have picked trivia and all of these things they were interested in at first, and then eventually they come to the more boring ones and was just like, oh, okay, I'll still go with it. But that seems to impact also the whole finding about how they think about the country. The last thing we did was we kind of looked at this moment where people decided to disengage. And we did logistic regression, where the dependent variable was just, did you stay with a country or did you move on? And we looked at how interest and the interests they reported in the previous trial, so kind of the change of interest, impacted this behavior of wanting to stay with a country or moving on. And what we found is that people seem to want to move on to the next country when interest was both high, which first seems a bit counterintuitive, but importantly, when also the previous interest was high. And the way you can think about it is, it seems that when interest seems to decrease from one trial to the next, so when interest starts to change and kind of die down, then people seem to likely to move on. And this might be right on top, or it might be kind of low when you're not very interested in, you might disengage quite quickly because you don't feel this growth of interest starting to pick up. So yeah, if we kind of look at a summary, we can find that with more information, interest in a topic seems to grow eventually, but eventually this starts to stall and decline. And then this happens, people move on to a different topic. Interest might decline, just linking it back to what I told you about intrinsic motivation. It might decline because future information becomes more predictable. So you learn less and less things about a country, and this might make new information less interesting because it becomes more easy to understand and you can predict more things about it. Like if you already know the location of a country, it kind of becomes intuitive what other parts of information might entail. And when given choice about a topic, interests seem to grow more quickly, but also declines more steadily afterwards. And this might be an effect of the item choice you have, that you pick more interesting item at the start, and then eventually you are left with the less interesting items. And yeah, that's it for me. Thank you for listening. Thank you for this opportunity. So yeah, if you are having any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you very much, Greta. It was a very interesting topic. Thank you very much for your nice presentations. So I'm going to give a minute in order to start receiving some questions. I have one of my own. I would like to start asking your question. I have, I couldn't think or something else about this opportunity in this education now setup that we have today in the platforms, doing this online education. I think that this could be very nice to study, to do research about this motivation, this interest that the students could have by doing their classwork in the platform, sometimes without the intervening or from the teacher. So how do you think that it could be used, this kind of research, in order to do, I don't know, maybe one activity or one homework or one sequence of topics? How can we apply this research in order to construct, the curriculum?
I think that's very interesting. One of the problems you always come across with intrinsic motivation is that it differs hugely between people. So I think there might be a need to kind of tailor it more to people and participants. So and I think maybe that is a strength of online learning, that you can, if you have kind of computer programs, it's more easy to tailor it to the individual, while in a classroom setting, it might not be too easy, because everyone always needs to be on the same page and at the same time. So people in online setting are more likely to be able to study at their own pace, so that it kind of starts and keeps being medium difficult. You don't have the people in there who are likely to be bored because they already know everything, or it's just very easy for them, and you repeat kind of the questions and the explanations, so that the people who find it very difficult also have a chance to understand it. So I think there's potential for that. And I know that the research group in the Flowers laboratory, who have kind of, if you remember the robot experiment, they are currently kind of looking at working with apps and using apps to help people learn and adjust the difficulty and kind of tailor it to the experience of the student. So that's really exciting.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and let me thinking about this, maybe as the same, for the example, for the interest or the motivation for doing science, for example, for involving into science. I don't know if something of this also can be applied to that. I don't know, maybe to approach to the scientific point of view of the psychology or physics and mathematics. I don't know if also there's maybe a line of research.
Yeah, there's definitely, I don't know the details, but there are definitely, if you look at educational psychology research, which really go into detail about how interest works in specific areas. I can't sadly tell you about the exact results of these, but I think, yeah, it will be good to know. And if there are some areas where people might be naturally drawn to and which have different preferences, I could imagine that someone who studies mathematics has different preferences for learning and are interested in different things. Because a topic is not just a topic. There's a lot of things you can learn within a topic and a lot of connections you can learn. Like, for me, it's a lot about understanding. I like drawing kind of connections to other topics. But not everyone is interested in that. And so understanding what kind of different things people are interested in and what might make them intrinsically motivated can, I think, make a good contribution to educational settings, especially if you look at it from a background that didn't tell you about these things, but things like curiosity or intrinsic motivation seems to be connected to well-being as well. So I could imagine that people who kind of feel more passionate about their schoolwork or their university work might generally have a better experience.
Okay, thank you very much. So please, we are going to be very happy to read your questions. So another question that I have also from your equations that you have in this no linear setup that you have until the quadratic term of the time, I would like to ask you about an example that could be in a higher order term. What could be, for example, if you put a quartic or another term, what could be in a sense of understanding? What is the application of that, doing that?
So I'm guessing if you, for example, have like seasonal effects that you might think that over the course of a year, it might go up and down and then up and down again. That might lead you to include other terms that might either be a sine curve, to have like sine curve modeling because that's the thing you think will happen, or it might be something you can just continue to include higher order effects to kind of have this up and down. It really depends on what is logical from your research. So you shouldn't just keep including terms just because you think they might apply, because we all know that we are likely to get into a case where we have overfitting and that we start to explain things, but it's actually not meaningful.
Okay, perfect. And I would like to ask you about if there's any research about, I don't know, if the participants have some cognitive decline disorder or something like amnesia. I don't know how this could be affect the intrinsic motivation or the I don't know, the interest.
That's very interesting. I don't think I'm not aware of any research in that area. But I think it would be very interesting to look at. So a lot of this research from cognitive psychology especially is very recent. It's kind of picked up in the last 10 years. So I think there's still a lot of room, and understanding how different kind of either like mental states, like something like mental health issues like depressions might affect it, could be really valuable to understand more about what's going on.
Okay, perfect. I think it's a very nice research area. I think it could be a lot of work in that, and I would like to ask you if you can share with us, I don't know, a little bit about the background that the students must have in order to start doing research in this kind of area. I don't know if you can explain us about a little bit the background that you have or you develop in order to do this research.
So I think just if you look at where this research comes from, it comes from all kind of different areas. So if you research from educational psychology, and I've certainly read a lot of educational psychology literature. You have research from cognitive psychology, so they're kind of interested in exploration of novelty, curiosity. The one experiment with the shock comes from marketing. Then the experiments with robots, they all have like computational backgrounds and computer science backgrounds. And there are actually quite a couple of kind of computer scientists who are more and more interested in learning and kind of using learning and curiosity to drive AIs, to make them to make them learn more about what they are explicitly told. So I think it depends on which kind of direction you want to go in. And the other part is that I very much encourage people to look beyond their own field and look at different kind of research areas, because I think the best people in this particular field do exactly that. They collaborate with different kinds of backgrounds because they can all contribute to it.
Yes, and as for the computational background, for example, in what code or program do you do your growth curve modeling?
So this was done in HLM, which just uses hierarchical modeling, but you can easily do it within R as well. Yeah, it's really easy to do in R. I'm pretty sure that every platform which has support of like hierarchical or just linear regressions can support just a simple growth curve analysis.
Okay, perfect. I have a question that it didn't appear in the comments, but I have a question here, the messenger. So they are asking me if you can talk about the relationship between creativity, motivation, or learning and motivation.
Sorry, could you repeat the first part?
Yeah, if you can talk us about a little bit about the relationship between the creativity and the motivation, and also between the learning and the motivation.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure about creativity and motivation. I think this is a very interesting topic, but I don't know enough about to be able to say this. But we know that different kinds of motivation can enhance learning. So that goes both from intrinsic motivation, we've now discussed today, but it also goes extrinsic motivation. So if you have like a reward attached to something, you're more likely to learn it. So the more motivated, might that be through you can gain money later on, or might that be because it's really interesting? It seems to kind of imprinted in your memory better, and you can see this in the brain as well. So there seems to be between the reward network, which kind of lights up when something is motivating, and the hippocampus, which helps you remember things. There seems to be a connection, strong connection between these areas.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. And I don't know if you can talk to us just to start closing this great talk that I thank you very much, Greta. I don't know if you can talk to us about a little bit your future research, your present research, how you are going to direct it in the next months, years.
So currently I'm working here at UWA in Simon Farrell's lab, and we are looking at a bit of a different area here. So what we are looking at is goal pursuit and how people kind of compromise between one goal or another, and how different kinds of uncertainty that might be social uncertainty. So if you have an opponent, what will they do? Or it might be environmental uncertainty, like you try to progress towards a goal, but you don't always get the progress. Or you might not know when you actually reach a goal. So how these different levels of uncertainty might influence your behavior and how you prioritize one goal over another. So I'm also interested, of course, in the type of uncertainty, and I'm always interested in when people kind of diverge from what is different from normal, what you would expect if people would just go for the goal attached with the highest reward. So when is there something more than just pure extrinsic motivation?
Perfect. Thank you very much. We have a question here in the comments. I'm going to read it. Is there a difference between the trajectory of the intrinsic and extrinsic motivation?
That is a very interesting question. So I'm not quite sure. You can see that if people, so from classroom settings, what I remember is that people kind of seem to also follow these curves over longer time periods of just how much they want to work towards a different a different area. But I'm not sure if that actually has been addressed in a very kind of controlled way, because classroom settings are always very messy. But it's definitely something people should look at if working towards, if getting rewards might eventually kind of, you start, if you can make money after a while, and eventually you just go like, I don't care about this money anymore. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, yeah, thank you very much, Shirene. Well, we are getting closer to the end, so I would like to ask you, Greta, if most of the people that are watching us are undergraduate students at the Department of Psychology, so I would like to ask you to give a message, a final message as a motivation for doing research and get involved in this kind of project, please.
I think it's difficult. I think, so what I learned about myself is that you kind of have to find your area, but also that you might not be you start a project and you go like, oh yeah, I think this could make work. Like when I started on Intrinsic Motivation, I was just like, oh yeah, this could be work, but I really fell in love with it over time. So I think this is kind of, just make your research your own, like get a different spin to it, get kind of what interests you in it. And I think that can make, like, passionate researchers are, in my opinion, the best researchers. So just get something you're passionate about. And even if you have a research topic you might not immediately be passionate about, find an angle you're passionate about and kind of follow that.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Greta. I hope you have a nice time with us. For us, it was very nice to have you. This, I think, is a very interesting topic. As I told you on the email, I think your research is very interesting. With my students, I would like to follow some of these areas, some of these lines of research. So thank you very much for this great opportunity. We have a peak of 45 people connected. We are still having 30 people from the two platforms. So I think it's a very nice number from Facebook and COGNiMATH. And also, I would like to invite all the people that are listening to us to the next talk that we are going to have next Wednesday. You can see in the line running on the bottom. We have the next talk from Jennifer Drake from Brooklyn College about the emotional benefits of involving in arts for children and adults. So I think we have a lot of activities. Thank you very much, Greta, for all your time. I know it's very early there in Australia, but thank you very much for this great opportunity. This also is your house, COGNiMATH group. So thank you very much for everything. And to all of you, thank you very much for this opportunity. Greta, if you want to say something for closing.
No, thank you very much for listening. And I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed presenting it.
I'm pretty sure. I know that maybe in the future, in following the talk, there are going to be some questions. So I'm going to send it to you by email.
Yeah, of course.
So thank you very much to all. I'm going to close the broadcast now. I'm going to stay with Greta a little bit more, only to say goodbye. And thank you very much, and have a good evening and be safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you.